Good morning, friends. Good morning. I'm going to close that out. Good morning. How are you today? And welcome to another episode of PB Reads the Bible. Boy, it seems like forever, doesn't it? Well, it has been a little bit. Been several weeks. Been several weeks. Oh, good. Notification just popped up. Only like a minute late. That's not too bad, I suppose. There, bothering me. But good to see everyone this morning. Good to be together in this way. Sorry, I was about a minute and a half, 2 minutes late logging on here. Just trying to get back into it. Had to get everything set up today, but we're back. We're back. PB Reads the Bible. What is PB Reads the Bible, you might ask, because maybe you're joining us for the first time. Well, I'm PB. First of all, I'm PB, Pastor Brian, pastor here at Christ UMC in Waynesboro. And this is PB Reads the Bible. When I do exactly that, I read the Bible, usually about a chapter of the Bible, and explain it a little bit. Try to open up some context and some different meanings than perhaps you're used to from the past. Just trying to help me understand it, and as I understand it, maybe help you understand it as well. That's what this is all about. And today we begin a new one. We're taking a look at First Corinthians. And so we'll get there in a couple minutes. But first, I'm going to give people a chance to kind of connect and log in, and so we can all be together in this way. All right. So this is the Romper Room roll call. You can let me know you're there, because Facebook, of course, tells me a number. YouTube tells me a number, but I don't see who you are unless you tell me. So I encourage you to say hello, good morning, whatever, in the chat section. So I see you're there, and I see a couple folks have done that. Good morning, Marcia. Good morning, Cheryl. Welcome back. Well, thank you. It's good to be back. And it's good to be back. It's good to be back doing this. It's good to be back doing this, being together and learning and sharing. And sharing is an important part of this. So we're sharing life together is how I express it, because we're a small group. And one of the purposes of a small group is to share life. Let each other know what it is that's taking place in our lives. Let each other know what's lifting us up and what's weighing us down, so that we can share the load. So go ahead and put in those things in the comment section as well. Your joys, your concerns, whatever you wanted to share this morning, and every morning. Do that every morning, and then we keep each other surrounded in prayer, not only during our sessions, during our episode. Excuse me, I'm going to lower this chair just a touch. That's more comfortable. Going to lower not only during this time together, but we will keep each other surrounded in prayer throughout the day and throughout the week. And of course, if you share something, we encourage updates on those things as we go along as well. So when you see answered prayer, you tell us. Of course, that's getting ahead of it too, right? Because I talk about that at the end of these things. Anyway, another episode of PB Reads the Bible. I don't know what total number it is, but it's episode 1 on our journey through First Corinthians. Number 1 on our journey through First Corinthians. We're probably not actually going to get to the Bible this morning. I don't anticipate that. I kind of hope we don't, because I don't know that I'm fully prepared. But we're going to spend some time talking about the context. We're going to talk about what's going on, what we know and what we don't know, what we kind of think might be taking place. We're going to talk a little bit about Paul. We're going to talk a little bit about Corinth. We're going to talk a lot about culture, what's taking place in the world. And like I said, we're going to talk about some stuff that we're kind of guessing on. But they're good guesses. They're educated guesses. They're not complete stabs in the dark, shots in the dark, whatever you want to say. They're things that are based on some very good research, and like I said, educated guesses, So we're going to go ahead and get started, and others can join us. Now, I know some of you folks may not be watching, may not be together with us, may not have joined us live this morning. You can go ahead and check in anyway and share your requests anyway. Also, for both those watching live and those joining some other time, I should say watching, those joining live and those joining some other time, if you have questions or comments, please put those in the stream as well. I do look off to my left to see the screen, to see what you're putting on there. However, Facebook doesn't always show me right away. I don't know why. Sometimes I don't see it until after I hit end and then go back in. But I do that. I go back in. I'll go back in a couple times today, and I'll go back in tomorrow, usually tomorrow morning before we start our next session. I go back in a couple times just to make sure that I'm caught up with all of your questions and comments. And if you have a question, I will do my best to answer it live if possible, perhaps directly with you only, if I think it's only something for you. But more often than not, I will then share your question anonymously, if you would prefer, in an upcoming session, so that I can fill everybody in on it. Of course, you can also do all of those things: check in, or comment, or question through texting. Send me a text, 570-351-1619. And I'll do the best I can to do that. So if I'm looking to my left, I'm checking what's going on Facebook, and if I look to the right, I'm looking to see what my phone is vibrating for. All right. First thing I'm going to do is I'm going to show you a map. Okay, I'm going to bring up a map here. This one. Make this a full screen. That'll help. There we go. Because it's important. Geography is important, despite what I might have thought when I was in middle school or junior high, whatever you want to call it. Geography is important, especially with the Bible. So it's very important for us to know where things are, and what, in order to have a better understanding of what's happening and what's taking place. Okay, so Paul is writing this letter to Corinth. Now, where is Corinth? What is Corinth? So you can see here on the screen, and I'll bring my cursor there, so hopefully that'll maybe show up a little bit. Probably won't. Oh, there it is. Good. See? Corinth, and that's this red dot right here. It's right here on this isthmus, connecting these two pieces of land. So it's about 40 miles. Yeah, I think it's about 40 miles. Yeah, 40 miles southwest of Athens, almost directly west, closer to west than it is southwest. So it's probably west southwest, not south southwest of Athens. It's almost directly across. Athens, of course, is the big city and the capital city. Corinth was a few miles. It was, as most cities of the time were, it was placed in a particular location so that it could be defendable. So it's not right on either of these seas. Okay, it's actually a few miles in, excuse me, from the seas. There's another city here, like Lyceum, I think is the name of it, is right around here, which helps to protect Corinth, but it's like right on the ocean. And there's another city over here, also designed to help protect Corinth. And Corinth is situated right against a mountain. So the backside of Corinth is very well protected. And it had plenty of springs, so it had lots of good, clean water. because of its location, Corinth was a pretty important commercial city. It was sort of a gateway. This over here, the open Mediterranean Sea, was a very dangerous place to, especially in first century anyway, to try to navigate. Storms could blow up, and we have those stories in Acts about some things that happened to Paul, and that happened over here on the Mediterranean because they were trying to beat the weather, and it didn't work, right? So what a lot of people would do, traders and stuff like that would do, is they would come into this sea and they would portage, Portage. Portage means to go from one body of water to another across land, generally speaking, carrying your boat. Now, if it's a big boat, they're obviously not going to do that. But, if you would portage canoes or small boats across land to get to another body of water. So they would do this, or they would unload here and come up and then reload over here to get into this sea. And then when they come out, they would be relatively protected here in this sea and go around here to get north up to Rome and stuff like that. All right. So they would use this. So Corinth was important commercially. Corinth was also very culturally diverse because of its location, if for nothing else. Sailors would temporarily reside there, and they would bring their culture and their gods. So archaeologists have found at least 20 different shrines to different gods of the time in that location. There's even stories of having a temple to like the unknown god, kind of like what Paul talks about in I think that's in Athens when he talks about the unknown god. And it seems Corinth did the same kind of thing there. Corinth was also considered like Sin City, we might say. It's almost like the Vegas of the time because of this commercialism and because of the culture, because of everything that was taking place. We might say that sailors would get paid and they'd want to spend their money. So it was kind of considered Sin City. Corinth was also fairly well developed technologically and artistically. They were very well known for work in bronze. I believe it was bronze. Yeah, for work in bronze. And should also be mentioned at this time, but I'll remind you later because it kind of is important. They one of the newest things of the time was the idea of the mirror, and they thought they had created like the best mirror. I've read that there in Corinth. So this kind of sets it up now. So Corinth had this reputation because of that, like Sin City. They were known for wealth. They were known for wealth, and yet they were also known for poverty. They had there was a very large separation between the haves and the have-nots, we would say, and it was a very steep pyramid. There was a lot of wealth, but there were only a few, we might say, at the top. Kind of almost sounds familiar in some cases, but it's very true that was the way it was. And although these are in Paul's letter, there's some places in Paul's letter that seems to back up these ideas. So it would seem that Corinth's reputation was at least partially well-founded, based on a variety of things, including what Paul says about them, as he talks about the wealthy and the poor in particular, and some other things that he does. When was the letter written? It would seem it would seem that, so okay, Corinth, Paul had a relationship with Corinth. Corinth was one of the cities, one of the places where Paul had said, established a church, begun a church, started a church. Excuse me. Um, and our best guess is that that took place in 50 CE, Common Era, AD, Anno Domini, whatever way you want to say it. So right around 50, Paul established a church in Corinth, and Paul was there for a while. But, excuse me, in 51, he's probably there for maybe close to a year. In 51, and this is based on Acts, you can read the story in Acts, and there was a new governor or whatever from Rome, Gallio, who came to town, and some of the people they complained about Paul and about Stephanus. I believe it was Stephanus. Yes, before Gallio, they complained that that they were stirring up the people and all of that, and actually Stephanus ended up getting beaten or whipped or something because of it. And Paul left the city, and that was, so we're basing this on what we know, and it's been established that Gallio was placed there in 51. So Paul was probably in the city for about a year, maybe a little bit more than a year, to establish the church, and then he leaves. This letter then came after that. How long after that? We don't know for sure. But based on a couple different things, again, bringing in Acts and bringing in some things he says in this letter, we're thinking it was the fall or winter of either 52 or 53. So 1 or 2 years after he left town. Why do we say that? Well, again, because of some of the things he says in his letters about talking about coming for another visit, but it would be after Pentecost. And he's describing some things that has to be taking place. So we go by that. We also go by the fact that Paul speaks of a previous letter. We refer to this as 1 Corinthians, Paul's first letter to the Corinths, to Corinth, to the church in Corinth. But it actually wasn't his first letter to Corinth, but it is the first one that we have. They do mention, Paul does mention in this letter, speaking of a prior letter, we would refer to it as the lost letter of Paul to Corinth. We don't have it. We don't know what Paul said in that letter, but we know that he sent that letter before he sent this letter. So the best guesses we have are that Paul got to Corinth in 50, left in 51, probably sent that first letter in 52, and then sent this letter, actually possibly 52, but almost more likely 53. It could have been 52. He could have sent both that lost letter and this letter in 51. Or, excuse me, in 52. But we don't know. So anyway, it's within that year or two time span. Does that make a difference? Not a whole lot, really. It really doesn't make a whole lot of difference between the two things. There are, let's talk about the Corinthian church. The Corinthian church is a mixed church. There's going to be some Jewish Christians, but there's also going to be Gentile Christians. Paul considered it really to be a Gentile church. He considered all of his churches to be Gentile churches because that was his mission. That was where he saw as his mission. Contrary to some other places, for instance, Rome, we're not seeing a conflict within the church as far as Gentiles versus Jews, Gentile Christians versus Jewish Christians. Paul speaks of them and as being one part of one family, all being all being Jewish now, we might say, all being part of Israel, the new Israel, perhaps even referring to it as that. So there doesn't seem to be a whole lot of problems in that way from the cultural aspect. I'm going to stop sharing my screen now. I think you've seen that map long enough. Although now you have to look at a larger image of me. Anyway, so there doesn't seem to be a conflict over Gentile versus Jewish background. That's not where the problem is. The problems lie somewhere else. Somewhere else. Some would say that Paul had a bad relationship with the Corinthians. That doesn't seem to be the case. This letter overall seems friendly, seems like they have a decent relationship. 2 Corinthians is a different story. When you get to 2 Corinthians, we see that their relationship between Paul and the church in Corinth has started to deteriorate and is breaking down. He is writing to them with a different tone and different understanding. But let's put that aside. Okay, there's really no evidence based on this that says Paul has a problem with Corinth or Corinth has a problem with Paul. It sounds, and again, we're only guessing because we don't have Paul's initial letter to the Corinth, nor do we have their letter to him. All we have is this letter, which is a reply to their letter to him. But it seems that in Paul's first letter, he's giving them some instructions, trying to guide them, and speaking about a couple issues in particular. Again, we don't know how many or which ones. And it seems that in their reply, they indicated a misunderstanding. And so Paul is replying to help correct them in their understanding of his initial teachings, perhaps as well as some additional teachings. Again, we don't have everything. Now, this letter is different than Paul's other letters in that respect, because this is the only one that is obviously, very obviously, a reply to a letter and contains questions and answers. In reply to your question, and he gives an answer. It's almost like he's going through their letter and their questions one by one by one, which is definitely different. Paul doesn't do that in his other letters. Okay, so we're getting there. We're getting there. There are some things to understand about culture from the first century, especially in Corinth, how they would understand things in order for us to kind of have a better understanding of what Paul is saying and how he's going about saying it. The first is what is called paterfamilias. We might almost say father figure, but the father figure, the father of the family, was considered, yes, definitely considered the head of the household, but was considered to be the head of the household with regards to how behavior is to take place, how everyone is to behave. The father is the model for the rest of the family. How the father behaves is how the rest of the family, the rest of the household behaves. And Paul takes on this character himself. He basically describes himself as your paterfamilias. As I act is how you should act, is what he's going to say to them. Okay, so this is their understanding. They would have no problem with that. They would get that. They would get that. Oh yeah, okay. He's our paterfamilias. We're supposed to follow, to act the same way that he does, culturally, morally, ethically. It's how we learn. It's how we learn. It's what we learn. Next thing we have to understand is the idea of honor. First century culture, I've already said there was a substantial amount of wealth by some people. but not by all. But not by all. So it was thought or understood, especially if you were in a lower class, that you're not really going to ever gain money or status that way. So it's a system of honor. Your primary motivating factor in much that you do is to gain honor and avoid shame. Yeah, you wanted to gain honor and avoid shame, because through honor, you could elevate yourself. And through avoiding shame, you could elevate yourself. By being shamed, you would be lowered. So you wanted to gain honor, and we might also say praise and blame. By gaining honor, you would be praised. By being shamed or by gaining shame, you would be blamed. Those were connected. Those concepts were connected. You, as a result, you always looked like forward. You looked ahead, you looked upward, we might say, trying to move upward through honor. And you might occasionally glance to the side to compare yourself to someone who is relatively horizontal and equal with you. But the primary motivation would be to look vertically, to look upward, to see how could I gain honor in this way. And that was a, excuse me. So Paul is going to write about praising and blaming and honor and shame, about shaming. He says that he does not write to seek to shame the Corinthians, but he's actually going to be shaming the Corinthians. So it's a way of teaching is how he's doing it. All right. He points out some cases in which they are shameworthy. I'm not writing to shame you, but I'm going to point out these cases, these particular things. Another cultural thing that's important to understand is patron-client. Patron-client. Everyone has a patron, at least one patron, basically, at the time. So patron is Lord. We might say Lord anyway. A person who is above you, who you are subject to, who you are called to honor, to respect, to work for and assist and all that stuff. But as a patron, you also had some duties and responsibilities to your client. And every client was actually a patron to somebody beneath them, at least to an extent, and this worked all the way up to the emperor. The emperor was patron to people under him. But Marcus Aurelius, who actually was emperor at the time, said that he was a client. He was subject to the gods, and that the gods were his patrons. So as a patron, you also gave some authority to your client. And your client then would kind of mete out the authority that you gave to him to his clients underneath him. And they would honor and praise him, and then they would do the same thing beneath them. All right. So it was an interesting cultural aspect. And Paul's going to be playing with that as well. Stoicism was an important philosophical thing of the time, in which, a Stoic would almost say that most things didn't matter. They were indifferent to a lot of things. They didn't tie up a lot of emotions or get attached to things, and really didn't show emotions either. We still have that expression. Ooh, he's so stoic. She's so stoic in this particular situation. So it's an important philosophical thing of the time, and Paul is going to be speaking to that, using that. You don't even, it's so culturally prevalent, you don't even have to speak it directly, and yet you're talking about it anyway. Paul uses rhetoric. rhetoric at the time was the way to teach, the way to teach. And there are a couple different ways of speaking with rhetoric. And using rhetoric is probably best way to say it is it's a model for persuasion. It's a model of teaching for persuasion. So you're going to be it's not like what we say when we ask a rhetorical question, in which we're not looking for an answer because the answer is kind of implied. It's right there. That's sort of what we're talking about, but not exactly. But so rhetoric is something that's used to persuade, and it's a particular way of speaking. And Paul uses it. And there's three different styles of rhetoric. I'll try to point them out as we go along, if I can remember to do that. All right. So Paul's letters. There are 13 New Testament letters that are attributed to Paul. And however, there is disagreement. There's a small number of biblical scholars that would give Paul credit for all of them, but the vast majority of biblical scholars do not. Vast majority would say less than that. Britain's Stoicism set aside today. Lots of flowers. Yeah, oh yeah, lots of flowers and tears today. That's for sure. But First Corinthians, universally, First Corinthians is accepted as one of Paul's letters, along with Romans, First and Second Corinthians, Galatians, Philippians, First Thessalonians, and Philemon. Those 7 are universally accepted as Paul's actual writings. They are the official, indisputed Pauline letters. The other 6, most scholars would say, are not written by Paul, but are written by a Paulinist. What does that mean? By one of his disciples, we might say, by one of his students, by somebody writing in his name. So what does that mean? Well, first of all, it was a common practice to write things in someone else's name. It was, at least to an extent, considered bad form to attach your own name to something, especially to a scholarly letter. And so you would, and which even in earlier times, in Hebrew times, we have like the book of Isaiah, which was written by at least 3 different people. But they're writing in the name of somebody who went before, honoring them, giving them respect. So that's probably what's taking place with up to 6 of these letters. They're being written in Paul's name to honor him. Why else would they write in Paul's name? To place Paul's authority on it. To place Paul's authority on their letters, to give a little bit more weight, a little bit more credence to what they wanted to what they were saying. So those other 6 are 2 Thessalonians, Colossians, Ephesians, 1 and 2 Timothy, and Titus. Those are the other 6. Now, and again, there are going to be some scholars that say some of these were Paul's, but still a couple more aren't. And then there are going to be a few scholars who say they were all written by Paul. Some of them, how do we know, or why do we say that why do we think that some of them weren't written by Paul? A couple different things. Some of the words weren't in existence in the first century, like they weren't, or at least not commonly used in the first century. They didn't make an appearance until the 2nd century, long after Paul was deceased, because the grammar, the structure, the style of writing is much different than Paul's. It doesn't match up with the way Paul writes in the ones that we know he wrote, or that we're very confident that he wrote. and also because they deal with topics, they deal with subjects that were almost of no interest to Paul, and very little, if any, interest to the first century church. They were things that came up in the second century and needed to be addressed then, but not in the first century. So one, two, or all three of those, perhaps other reasons as well, we're pretty confident that Paul did not write some of those letters, like those 6. All right. But this one we're sure Paul wrote. It is similar in style to some of his letters, and different in style in some of his letters. And I spoke about that as far as the way it's unique in how he's obviously responding to a letter from the church, and he is trying to answer their questions and clear things up. Paul's, and again, it seems that one of Paul's biggest reasons for writing, in addition, yes, to clear up their confusion, but something that he seems to really be addressing is his displeasure with the fact that they're letting culture, the way culture worked, impact the church unity. Church unity. He speaks of church unity with diversity. He speaks of church unity with diversity at the same time, which is very countercultural for the time. He doesn't want to see the differences that are pointed out in culture being pointed out in this new community, in this church. He wants there to be more unity, especially between the rich and the poor. So we will see all of those things in the coming days. But I think that's going to be it for today, friends. We've been about 35 minutes, just to go over some of the background of Corinth. I hope that you don't have any glazed over eyes. I hope this has been. I hope you learned a little bit. I hope you were able to stay awake. Didn't find it too terribly boring. Thank you, friends, for joining me this morning or whenever you're joining. I do pray that it has been beneficial, that it's been a beneficial use of your time as you go about your day, not just today, but every day. Keep those eyes and ears open to everything that our living, loving, active God is doing in your life and in the lives of those around you. When you see it, when you hear it, say, "Thank you, God," and then tell somebody about it. Until we meet again, my friends, be blessed. Be blessed. Bye.